All right, welcome everybody. Great to see you all here again for the second session of our Doing Deliberative Democracy course. I think we've got a couple of people at least who this is their first session, so welcome. I'll reintroduce myself because of that. I'm Chris Reedy. I'm the course director and a professor at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS. And we've got an exciting session today. We've got guest speakers. So it's going to be a lot of fun, I think, to hear from people experienced with working with deliberative democracy processes. And you're going to have a chance to speed date with them. And so they're going to do a little presentation each, but then you'll have a little bit of time with each of them to ask questions, have a bit of a chat in smaller groups. So one of the things, we were just talking about this before we let you all in, that we're trying to do in this course is also give you experience with lots of different facilitation techniques and processes that you can use. And some of them are specific to an online space, different kind of platforms that you can use online, but others are things that you can also use in a face-to-face situation. So the speed dating is one of those that works really well face-to-face, but you can also make it work in an online setting. So we'll have a taste of that coming up. And we're going to have a little bit of a focus on critical thinking and understanding biases today before we get into the session with our guest speakers. So those being, I think, fairly important practices for doing deliberative democracy and for helping your participants to think critically and to reflect and see their own worldviews, which is, you know, something that's very hard for us to do and is really at the core of deliberation, because if we're going to deliberate, we're going to actually listen to other perspectives and we're going to try and set aside our own assumptions and try and see where our initial reactions on something come from. So I think it'll be interesting to talk about that. Before I introduce our guests, I want to acknowledge country, and I want to acknowledge that we're all on different Indigenous lands today. Our guests are spread as far as and wide as northern New South Wales, Western Australia and Victoria, Falls Creek. So we'll be on very different Indigenous lands. We have people on the call from New Zealand. So all of us on different ancestral lands, and I want to acknowledge the elders past and present and leaders of those Indigenous peoples who have been here long before many of us were, and have been the custodians of knowledge in this land. And I do want to now welcome our guest speakers. So first up is Carson, Lynn Carson is from the NewDemocracy Foundation, who are our partners in developing this course. And Carson, she prefers to be called Carson, that's why I'm doing that, is a former professor in applied politics at the University of Sydney Business School, and also currently serves as NewDemocracy's research director. She's written handbooks on community engagement and many articles and book chapters on public participation, quite a few of which I think you'll find referenced inside the course. So they're well worth checking out. Carson initiated the global network Democracy R&D, and she recently recorded the podcast series Facilitating Public Deliberations with Nivek. And you'll find a lot of those referenced in the course as well. So some of her work, as it says here, research notes, podcast episodes and more have been reproduced for this course, which we greatly appreciate. Welcome, Carson.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone.
Now we also have Anna Kelderman. Welcome, Anna. Anna is, I love this bio, Anna is a convertible town planner and community engagement consultant, switching from planning to engagement willy-nilly, or as the project applies, and working predominantly where there is complexity, like urban infill planning, which is highly charged, or coastal hazard management, where the news is hard to share and it's even harder for decisions to be made that affect people for decades. Anna's main passion is collaborative engagement for planning and community building projects, focusing on community-led outcomes, which led her to get into deliberation. which is why we're very happy to have her here today. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you, and hi everyone from me.
Anna is the one in Western Australia today, just so that you can locate people physically in your mind. And then finally, we have Kristen Favaloro. Welcome, Kristen. And Kristen is in Falls Creek, and I believe even has snow out the window, which is just wonderful. I'm saying this, you know, for many of us being locked down and unable to go anywhere, so feeling a bit jealous. But Kristen commenced with the Strathbogie Shire in May 2020, having more than 20 years experience in communications, engagement and journalism. Before this, she spent 6 years at Goulburn Murray Water, leading the communications, media and engagement department. And as an engagement practitioner, Kristen has been involved in 2 deliberative forums at Goulburn Murray Water and most recently at Strathbogie Shire. As a former journalist and newspaper editor, she says her career highlight is winning 2 International Newspaper of the Year awards as editor of 2 different publications. She's a champion of engagement practice and lives and works by a pretty simple ethos, which is people should be involved in the decisions that affect them, which I think is a great ethos, and great to have you here with us today, Kristen. Welcome.
Thank you, and hello everyone.
So I think that's about it for the welcomes and introductions. So if you're ready, Nivek, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the first section, which is going to be about critical thinking and understanding biases.
Okay, well, I hope some of you, if not all of you, had a chance to watch the New Democracy Foundation videos. I think Chris mentioned it in his announcement on Friday. I've also put you all into small groups, which you're going to go into as discussions today. And they are also the small discussion groups that you're in for Module 2, so that as well as the general discussions on each page, and the fact that during Module 2, you're mainly working on your own plan for a deliberative process, you've got a small group that you can tic-tac with as you need and want to share ideas, ask each other questions, test things that you're proposing to do. I'm just going to share my screen to show you that list. It's also in the Zoom, the page for Zoom. So there's the groups. You'll see your name. I've got you all in those groups, although it seems that Tiffany isn't here. Tiffany hasn't joined us today, so group 1's going to be a bit small. And there's a Miro board for each group for you to actually look at, what needs to be done and so on in this next section. Now, I didn't realise that if you didn't already have a Miro account, you need to get one. So about a half an hour before this session, I sent everybody an email inviting you to join your Miro group. So if you want to have a look at that, you can. I'll just quickly, that's not the thing I wanted to do. All right. Here we go. So look, what we're going to ask you to do is to go into the groups, and when I press the group button, it'll just take you into those groups. And then we want you to sort of talk together about how you approach dealing with, approach critical thinking, identifying biases. And there's 2 questions that we're wanting you to turn your mind to. So one is, what practices do you find useful to help you think critically? And what helps you to identify your personal biases and step outside your own worldview? Now, the Miro board, it's a setup with those. And so it's a bit like the Jamboard. You can each add your, ideas and so on through sticky notes. But we'd really like you to be talking to one another. And this time we've actually got our act together, and we're letting you know in advance to select someone to report back from your group, just briefly. And after that, we'll be moving on to our guest speakers. So you've got 10 minutes. I'm going to click you off all into your rooms, and hopefully, Kate?
Yes, could you just give a little, what does it mean to think critically? A little, I'm not exactly sure what you mean.
Okay, so you didn't get a chance to watch the video?
I've watched a few videos.
Okay, I am going to flick this to Carson because she's the one that actually put the stuff together for New Democracy. I could say something, but I think we'll go to the senior expert.
Gee, thanks a lot, Vic. Well, it would help enormously if you watched the film clip, and it was produced exactly for this reason, to explain what it means to interrogate expert knowledge in a way that is methodical. So it's the film clip takes you through various principles, asks you to consider clarity and depth and logic and so on, and gives examples of how you would do that, the kind of questions that you would ask in order to interrogate an expert and to determine what the facts are underneath the opinion that may be being expressed. So it's trying to separate opinion from factual evidence, and it gives you, that little film is just giving you some practice in how you might do that. So critical doesn't mean to criticize. It's used in that analytical sense that in order to interrogate well, then you need to be very analytical rather than use your emotions. Does that help? I'm not sure that it does, Kate.
I think so. My apologies if I've missed it. I got up to 1.15. I don't know where it is.
Oh yeah, no, no apologies necessary, Kate. There's a lot of material to get through. We know that. It's actually in the Zoom session for today, like it's on the page for the Zoom session. There's links to the 2 videos. Now, we come back to those videos later on in module 3 when we're looking at what happens in the room when you're setting the scene with a deliberative mini public, a group of people. You're wanting to support them to actually think differently about the materials that are presented to them. You're wanting them to think, as Carson said, critically, but not to actually be, narky about it. And you're also wanting them to be able to identify their own biases. So, we've all got biases. It's that sort of idea about, the little bubbles that we're in when we're on Facebook that tend to just give us our own biases back at us. And unless you're watching the Facebook of the New South Wales, 11 a.m. press conference, in which case you see a lot of things that have nothing to do with your biases, and you get a bit upset when people are very mean. But there's a lot of different ways of approaching that. You might do it naturally in your roles, but a lot of people coming into it, you've got such a diverse group coming into a deliberative mini public that they, some of them will be used to it, some of them won't, and that's why, this is one of the exercises we recommend you do with them. And we wanted to do it with you so that you got a taste of that. And we thought it would also be helpful for you going forward throughout the course to actually think about, the information we're giving you. Don't just passively receive it. Think about it. Does it make sense to you? Are there areas where we're not providing enough information, where what we're saying doesn't make sense? So, look at what we're giving you and make decisions as well. Now, in terms of, someone asked how to get to the Miro boards, I did send everybody an email earlier.
Rebecca, I've just popped all the links in the chat for the different groups. And
because I've added you through your email address into the Miro boards, you should be able to get into them. Fingers crossed. So I'm now going to put you into your rooms. So I'm going to go open all rooms and off you go.
welcome back. Thank you for overcoming those technical challenges which were caused by me, and still managing to write lots of very interesting stuff on the Miro boards, which I've just been peeking into. So we're going to do a very quick report back from each group because we're running a little bit behind now. So I'm going to, I think last week we mixed it up and went from the end. I'm going to really confuse things this week and start in the middle with group 3 and ask whoever has been nominated as the feedback person from that group to tell us a little bit about what you wrote on your Miro board. in case you're wondering about your group number, group 3 is Rachel, Kate, Tim, and Paula.
Well, we missed the bit about nominating.
Sounds like it might be you now, Kate.
I think it's Tim. He was doing the scribing, so.
That means I'm not doing it, Kate.
Okay. Does it? Okay, all right, I've got to find the Miro board and then I can't see you lot, so that's all right. So you just want me to report back on the 2 answers to the 2 questions?
Yeah, what was the sort of main themes coming out?
Well, I suppose critically thinking was, making sure we had enough information, questioning the source of information, checking facts. There was reflective thinking, running things past, like in your own head, checking for assumptions, and being in dialogue and having conversations with people. And then it sort of morphed across into practices to again identify your personal biases. So, talking to people who have different views, that was kind of in both. And that was just continually listening to other people, checking biases in who you're listening to, and even just sort of giving more weight to certain sources of information, making sure you really listened for less dominant voices, and so that you can understand others' lived experiences. And there was groupthink as well, just being aware of getting kind of swept along or thinking because everyone's saying it, it must be true. I think that's about it.
Great, thank you. All right, group 4, which was Tatiana, Sabina, and Natalie. You have a spokesperson.
Yes, I am the spokesperson. I'm happy I wasn't the first one. So in terms of critical thinking, we thought that reading peer-reviewed research, something that's reliable, checking the sources, using a wide range of sources, so interrogating different types of sources, again, I'm repeating myself, making the distinction between expert knowledge and lived experience. So engaging with people who have experience on the ground, as well as I said, peer-reviewed sources and research. Yeah. And then in terms of identify our personal biases and step outside of our own worldview, a few things. So we thought that engaging in reflective practice and asking ourselves why do we think the way we do is quite important. Being open and receptive to different perspectives. Asking for critical feedback and being open to receiving it and making the change. Questioning the algorithm and being proactive to find sources beyond the top results, and engaging with different perspectives.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, I think that that one about reflective practice and continually asking yourself questions about why do I think this way, that's an important one, important practice for academics as well. So thank you for sharing that one. Next up, we'll go to group 5, which was Anne, Anna, Christy, and Aline. Or Elle.
Okay. I guess I'll speak for us. We had a lot of the same things that have been coming up in the last 2. One thing that's maybe just slightly pushing it further is actively seeking opposing views, looking for someone who might think differently, and that reflective part, listening to that justification and listening to your own justification of your view in that context of having sought an opposing view. Much of the same about considering the sources and looking at a lot of different sources and allowing yourself to be challenged. Oh, that's probably it.
Thank you. That's great. I think adding that extra dimension of not just thinking critically and respecting other views, but actually going and finding other views and trying to find challenges to the way you're thinking, that adds an extra dimension to it. So thank you. Now we'll go back to the start with group 1. So that was Tiffany, well, not Tiffany today, Simon and Lara.
We didn't nominate one of us. Laura, you can jump in as well. Critical thinking. There's a whole field of study called argumentation, which looks at the kinds of critical questions you can ask to probe an argument that somebody makes. I found that incredibly useful, and I teach that to my students as well. So if somebody makes a particular kind of argument, you can immediately think, what questions could I ask about that? That's called argumentation schemes. And I use a technique myself for mapping ideas and arguments, which is a variation of mind mapping, but it's specifically designed to capture multiple perspectives and areas of disagreement. We can also ask whose interests are being served by this argument, because an argument is invariably going to have outcomes that serve a particular kind of constituency. And we might ask, where are the system boundaries being drawn? When somebody defines this problem, they are going to be excluding certain things from that definition. And somebody else might think, hang on, that's important. We can't just not talk about X, Y, Z, because you've decided to circumscribe the problem in a particular way. Lara, do you want to do personal biases and worldview?
Yeah, I'll try with my internet. We said a good way to check your personal bias is to try to mix with people that you wouldn't normally interact with in your, I don't know, your friend or family group. What did we also add? You also added, Simon, that checking to see if you receive an immediate reaction when someone is saying something. That might be because you have a personal bias. Try to look at news sources for a variety of different news sources. I also, for example, use DuckDuckGo, which means that the cookies, cookies aren't remembered on your browser, so therefore you're not given information that's fed through an algorithm. We also do an unconscious bias test. That's about it.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, lots of interesting ones there, and yeah, we do have to remember the Google's algorithms directing us to particular things that we have already looked at before. So yeah, looking out for news sources and using different tools that can help us to find them can be a good thing to do. Which brings us finally to group 2, Fiona, Gareth and Annika. Who would like to speak for you?
Thanks, Chris. I'm happy to do that. And nice to meet you all. I was unable to attend the first session, so I'm a new face here and playing a bit of catch up, but on board now, so nice to meet you. Yeah, we talked about a lot of similar things. We talked about just gathering a lot of evidence, but not just the evidence, but also fact checking that evidence. So where does it come from, and how legitimate might it be? Avoiding any assumptions and active listening and demonstrating empathy. So a lot of the things have already been mentioned, but also talked about as was prompted by the video, the depth of that evidence as well. So how detailed might that be? Has been critically reviewed, and the breadth. So just making sure that there's a wide variety of viewpoints and sources of evidence when you're weighing things up. As for the personal biases and stepping outside our own worldview, we talked a lot about self-awareness and as best you can, being aware of your own assumptions and biases, and also that sense when someone might start speaking and you have an immediate reaction based on what you know about that person. So being able to put that emotional response to one side and consider the issue on its merits, not just the emotion or the person. We talked about actively practicing respect. So if you're in a group discussion building a rapport with the wider room and not just an individual that you might be naturally drawn to in the first instance, and maybe putting that on hold and pushing yourself into other directions. And just having some mechanism to be able to remember the remit or the aim or the objective, so that you're not getting yourself off course and sort of down rabbit warrens, I suppose. So I think that was the bulk of it, unless anyone from the group's got anything to add.
That's great, Gareth, and thank you, group two, sorry. See, I've mixed myself up with this starting in the middle business. All right, so we will collate what you came up with on those Miro boards and share it as a resource for you, so you can get a sense of what all the other groups said as well. And as mentioned before, there's more material on this in the course as well for you to dig into. But now I want to shift focus to our guest presenters, and the way this is going to work, we give each of our three presenters a little bit of presentation time. They're going to talk to us about their experience in using and designing deliberative processes, including what they might see as the pros and cons of that style of engagement. And we'll go through the three presentations, and then we're going to break you off into groups to do the speed dating part of this. So while our presenters are speaking, if questions occur to you, jot them down so that when you get your time with each of the speakers, you are able to ask those questions and haven't forgotten them by the time you get through all the presentations. So encourage you to do that. But without further ado, I'm just going to go in the order I've got on the sheet here, which means Carson is up first, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm on Bundjalung land up on the northern New South Wales. And it was in this place that I had at least one term as an elected representative in local government. And I think that's what has influenced an awful lot of what I do, mainly because I think if you were to design the world's worst decision-making process, you would design local government in Australia, but that's a personal opinion. And I think it led me to a belief that is very similar to Kristen's, which is that I just think people should be able to make the decisions that affect them. And everything that I have done since then is about looking at processes that enable that. I'm glad we started with the critical thinking and the biases, because that's been a fairly recent pet project of mine. And a bit like Simon, I was teaching it in a university context and very influenced by its power. And I think it's actually about honing our questioning skills more than anything else. And I've seen it used to great effect in public deliberation, to the extent that I've had, at least, I recall this one participant saying that she would never watch the news in the same way again. And I thought, well, my work is done. You know, if we can just encourage people to really question experts and to try to get underneath opinions that are offered to us. The time that I have now is not really a presentation. It's more of, that's much too sophisticated term for the blather that I am embarking on here. But only to say that I'm clearly a devotee. I've been doing this for a long time now, something like 30 years, as an elected representative, and then as an academic, as a researcher, as a practitioner, and so on. So you're not going to get an unbiased perspective from me in relation to deliberative democracy, because I actually think it's the answer to so many of our problems. And I think there is almost nothing that you could not subject to a public deliberation. And the only thing that is going to vary is how you would do that and what other methods might you do alongside that. You know, how much dialogue do you need, as well as the deliberation, and so on. You know, how complicated is the problem, how complex is the problem, tends to be the motivation for deciding what kinds of methods that you use. But having now run many citizens juries and citizens panels and been involved in consensus conferences and deliberative polls and citizens assemblies, and you know, I can talk underwater about this, and I'm not going to. So I just wanted to say, look, can't wait to have a 10-minute conversation with you, and it'll be in the interchange, the exchange that we have, that may be most useful for you, rather than have me talk at you for any length of time. So that's me.
Thanks so much, Carson. And if I was in one of those groups, I would want to dig into the difference between dialogue and deliberation, because I just heard you make a distinction there, and I'm wondering about that. So I don't want to plan any questions for us. I realize I just have. All right, I'm going to move next to Kristen, and over to you to do the same sort of gig.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having me here today. I'm actually working on my husband's computer because even though I'm on holidays at the snow, I forgot my power cord. What an idiot. Oh, am I still working? I feel like I might be frozen.
You're fine. We're still seeing you fine.
Oh, good. Okay. So as you heard in my intro, I'm a journalist, a newspaper editor, and I've turned to media manager, communications and engagement. And I have to say that without a doubt, engagement is my absolute favourite part of my job. It's so much more than traditional communications and putting tools and information out there, you know, and it's so much more than what you see as I suppose what is traditional consultation that local government use. So, you know, again, in my intro, Chris said, I really, really believe that people should be involved in decisions that affect them. And how fun is it that engagement practitioners, I suppose, get to create that process to make sure that we understand people's views in making decisions. So I've been really lucky. I've been involved in 2 deliberative forums, and I thought I would use today to run you through a little bit of information on how they work. So first one was at Goulburn Murray Water. I used to work for a rural water authority. If you don't know what Goulburn Murray Water is, it's Australia's largest rural water authority. It manages most of the irrigation delivery water in northern Victoria. So obviously it's a pretty controversial kind of topic and area to do. So for us, the ESC, who is the independent regulator for pricing in the water industry, essentially told water authorities that if they couldn't prove that their community or their customers had been involved and agreed with the decisions that they put forward in their pricing submissions, they weren't going to approve them. So as an engagement, I suppose, team at Goulburn Murray Water, we went through some pretty serious discussions, even just to convince the board and those who work at Goulburn Murray Water that a deliberative forum was actually the right method to use, or the right way forward. So it was a very interesting process. And I suppose the previous price submission for Goulburn Murray Water had been attracted some pretty strong criticism from customers. The ESC actually refused some of the proposals that Goulburn Murray Water put forward because they didn't see that their customers supported them. So lots of pressure on us, you know, people really concerned. Deliberative engagement worked brilliantly in that case. So, you know, if we look at what we had to deal with, big complex issues, certainly a political hot potato, you know, water is always something that attracts a lot of interest. We needed our customers to support and trust the decisions that we were making, and we couldn't do that without showing that the customers were part of that decision making. And we wanted to hear from our customers that we didn't usually hear from. So after our deliberative forum, which of course we put forward a range of topics and different speakers and, you know, different points of view and all those sorts of things. We tested them, we polled, we did all those sorts of things. GMW put forward a pricing submission to the ESC, of which every single one of their proposals was approved. And we had, I think, one, I suppose, submission to the ESC criticising the process. Apart from that, it was all supported. So I think that's just an example of how deliberative engagement really works. At council was a really similar story. The Local Government Act of 2020 legislated that councils had to use deliberative engagement to develop their community vision and council plan. So we've just very, very recently done I suppose, a community panel to do that work. We finished, I think, our last day on the 1st of August. So that was a fabulous experience as well. And I actually think one of the things that I really valued from that, not just that we went out and we got that representative sample from our community, not just that we heard from people that we don't normally hear from, it was also that very recently I had a phone call from one of the participants actually, and she was just a little bit concerned about something. And I was able to use stats. You know, we tested this, we tested your level of agreement, and these were the results. And it was a wonderful, I suppose, conversation that I was able to have with a participant who then really understood how fair and democratic the process was. So what else was I going to say? So pros and cons, you asked us to speak to pros and cons, and I'm going to quickly run through some of the things that I think are pros and cons to deliberative engagement. So pros are things like supported decisions. You get to hear what your community really thinks. And it means that the decision makers are really confident that they're making the right decision. Decisions on tough issues. As you know, it's really hard. Sometimes there's a no-win situation and it doesn't matter what you decide, you'd be criticised. But deliberative engagement can really change that. You know, you can get an answer and a way forward to a really tricky issue that you may have been sitting on hold for a very long time. And because the community has seen that the community's been involved in the decisions, they support it. Builds trust. And I really think that this is my favourite part of deliberative engagement. You know, when communities are involved, they trust the decision, and essentially you're building an army of supporters or advocates for, you know, your organisation. What else did I say? I'm looking at my notes, sorry. Another pro, I think, is independence in the process. So using that independent recruitment, independent facilitators really shows that council isn't influencing, council in my case here, the decision. And I think that, again, they trust in what we're doing. So when it came to cons, I thought really hard about this. And I think that the cons that I've come up with are probably more just challenges, not necessarily cons, if that makes sense. So first of all, it's a lot of work. It's really hard. Solving complex problems means you have to put a lot of time into getting the right information, getting that really open, honest, and in-depth information to the participants. You have to make sure that there's skin in the game. And I think, you know, in our room, when you guys were in rooms just before, we spoke a little bit about convincing the people, as in the organisation, that they need to let people make decisions and they have to share really open and honest information. And that's not always easy. I find that people always want to go to a comms piece where they just are informing rather than actually letting people be part of the decision making. And finally, I think, again, it's really hard to work with your presenters, so your subject matter experts, to ensure that really open and honest conversation. But again, they're not necessarily cons, they may be just challenges that we need to overcome. And that was it for me today.
Thank you, Kristen. Again, I would love to dig more into those challenges and how you've overcome them in the processes you've been involved with. But, I'll leave that for the speed dating. So Anna is up next and I'll hand straight over to you.
Thank you. I am going to put some images on the screen at some stage because I just desperately want you to see some things, just as a way of a bit of proof of concept. So as a planner entering this industry, and essentially I found myself in this space because there were so many things that I was doing as a planner that were just causing such a ruckus. And communities were getting really cranky and they were like going to the media, and then obviously social media started existing and that was terrible. And everyone was just totally afraid of outcomes, totally afraid of who was going to talk. And we would have long conversations about which agitator in the community was going to be a problem. And it didn't feel very nice to refer to a lot of people as problems. And it also didn't feel really nice to sort of gloss over what they were saying, because a lot of what they were saying was actually real. You know, when people were saying in the planning sector, I've got a one-story house next to me and I don't want it to be 6 stories tomorrow, that's fair. There might be a strategic reason for doing it, but it just it's not unfair. And so my most hated term is NIMBY, because I think it's a really mean way of othering people who just have a concern and no one's answering the question for them. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And I've done a few different deliberative processes, but most of them have been around infill planning. So when we're changing the nature of an area. And I think the example that I want to show you is one that I really like, because not only was it a successful process in terms of, at the end of it, people were really pleased with the outcome, but it actually produced outcomes that we as technical experts would never have produced. We wouldn't have thought we could do it. Wouldn't have thought we could get away with it. So I think that's the success, and I'll show you some pictures. This project I like to describe as small scale, tough crowd, and ready for battle. So this was not their first rodeo. They had already been to the highest levels of the Planning Commission in Western Australia to argue against an application in the area, a planning application for some development, and they were very, very motivated, and they were set up. So they'd been set up for about 2 years. The one good thing about this particular process, it was the back end of it was the sort of second part of another process that I'd run with Nivek's help, selecting a panel for the broader area. And so the council was not my problem. The council was fully supportive of the process. But the way that it was brought to me was not great. So the way that it came to us was the state government had said yes to this approval that had caused the ruckus. And then they said, but it's not enough to just do this one building, you need to do the whole area. So it was a forced process, which means kind of everyone feels like it's not really their job. And so that's difficult. And there's a lot of excuses there. But it was for good planning reasons, and it did have all the reasons in the world. So we wanted to do it justice. We knew that there was division, so we knew we had to take a bit of time with people. We also knew that there was kind of a lot of lack of knowledge of what was already happening in the area. So we felt like there was an opportunity there to spend some time. And we could see that the community didn't quite understand what the trade-offs were. They thought it was just nothing or this enormous thing. And so we wanted to build that story with them. We went pretty honest, and we told them, something was going to happen. So let's figure it out together. And then we did this sort of broad process where we asked everyone, Tom, Dick and Harry, do we say? Everyone what they thought. And they told us a lot of stuff. And so we had sort of a fairly long period before we started, and then we got them all in together. We got the panel into the room to take all that information and distill it down. Just in terms of, and now I'm going to share because I just want to, it's not so much the presentation words that I want you to see, it's more that I want you to see, desktop one, that one. So that when we were looking at that, hang on, no pause. Can you see that? Resume share, there we go. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it, Anna.
That's fine. So this was part of the planning. From the feedback that we got, we knew we had some different things that people were asking for, and we knew we had to figure out what levers we were able to discuss. We tried to figure out who had perspective that could aid those discussions, the themes that were coming through. We also thought about who needed to say something from the community. Who were those people in the community that actually were going to speak, whether we gave them a voice or not? So we invited them, not to be part of the panel, but to present. So who had skin in the game as well? So who were the people from various agencies that had to say something as well? And we also played with the best way to illustrate outcomes. You can just see on the page there just how much of what they sort of put on paper was then reflected in final planning. And so that the picture on the left is some of their own sketches, and the picture of the right starts to translate that into planning speak. But the other thing that we got to do, we had this over 3 sessions, and in the first session we got this sense that I said before, it was nothing or everything. And we were able to sort of bring to the table some things that were already happening. And the picture on the right is pretty much a dead set reflection of the neighbourhood as it was developing. And the picture on the left there is the study area, and all those red dashes are the houses that have already done the thing on the right. And so when they were saying we don't want all of our trees to go, we were actually able to say, at the moment they can. It's already possible. So how do we design it so it's better? And we showed them lots of pictures, and this was one that they universally loved, even though it was easily 4 stories higher than they ever thought they would be willing to talk about. And this is really where I got really excited, because they started drawing sketches for us about built form. And that one at the top right, the little yellow one, is actually what we ended up with the planning rules. They said, we're okay with taller, and 3 stories was a low one, but they were like, we just want that big rear setback. We want that big outcome so we can still have our trees, and we want a decent front setback so we can still have our trees. So this was kind of us coming out of this with something I would never have thought we could do. And just quickly, because I'm hoping that I can talk more in the rooms, I've framed pros and cons as conditions, and my first one is just to do it, because I think, as everyone else has said, it is just so valuable. And I think the don't go too fast is my condition, and the reason for that obviously is that it's really important to take the time. Obviously that's a con. It takes a long time. But I think it's also a pro, because the longer you take to give people meaningful discussion, the better equipped they are to investigate what you're saying. And so that's really nice too. The more space and time you give them, the more likely it is that they'll apply some critical thinking and go off and do some research. I always call the community an expert. I guess the con there is, if you don't have a good process, the experts will come out and speak anyway. If you do have a good process, the experts are actually in the room and they're telling us something. Obviously, designing the question is important, making sure that you don't say, you can have whatever you want, if they can't. And this is probably the biggest pro for me, which is that any citizen-led decisions are an investment in the future. They're an investment in future relationships, they're an investment in future decision-making, they're an investment in future support. And so as a pro, all of those people become the greatest of allies. That's it. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Anna. I realised a little bit late that I don't think we were seeing what you thought we were seeing. So I think we were seeing the back end of the presentation, and it wasn't moving for us. So if anyone wants to see those images, maybe you could talk about that in the speed dating part. Apologies for that. I was connecting what you were saying to what I could see, but then I realised it didn't. A bit late. Okay, so we're a little bit behind. We're about 10 minutes behind where we intended to be at this point. So I thought I would just do a quick check. Can people go, say, 5 or 10 minutes beyond the hour so that you've got a bit more? So you still have the same time with our presenters largely. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. If anyone does have to go, of course, please do. And if you missed the last bit, we are recording it, so you can check in on that later. But yeah, it'd be nice to keep the 10 minutes with each of our presenters for the speed dating part if we could. So let's aim to do that. Nivek, are you doing the breakout room?
I've got all the rooms ready, so I'll just click open.
All right, welcome back everyone. Thanks for bearing with us for going a little bit over time. Much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed those conversations. I know 10 minutes is very brief for a wonderful deep conversation about deliberative democracy, but we wanted to give you a taste of that kind of process of speed dating, and that's something you can use with participants in a deliberative process as well. And you can give more time than the 10 minutes that we limited you to today, of course. So thank you. I'm going to, before I close, just give Nivek a couple of minutes to tell you what to be focusing on in Module 2 before our next Zoom session, which is going to be, it's on a different day, which is a Thursday next week, and it's in the morning at 10 o'clock in Sydney time. So Nivek, what should our participants be focusing on before then?
So Module 2 is set up to introduce you to how you go about preparing and planning for a deliberative process. And I'm not going to take you through the actual pages in the module, but the thing here, that can you still see that? No, is paused.
We can see your template.
Okay, sorry, you can see my template. Oh, that's good. It said to me it had stopped showing you the template. Okay, so this template's been put together so that you can actually work through the information that we're providing and answer various questions, so that at the end you've got a draft plan for something that you might want to prepare and run a deliberation on. So it's all, I won't take too long today, but it's all set up really in line with the different pages. So page 2.1 is about, is deliberation the right approach? 2.3, you know, about the remit, asking the right question, and this gives you a space to sort of do some work on that. There's, I won't go through it all, it's roles and responsibilities. It basically mirrors the pages and the information, getting the numbers right. How many people do you think you need on your mini public? How many meetings and over what period of time? Those sort of things. So there you can see that. And as well as having some discussions in each of the pages and you turning your mind to how you'd apply what you're learning, we set up the groups so that you could actually talk to someone else about your thinking and, you know, do some work together. You can continue on the Miro boards if you want. You're each in a group discussion based on the group numbers you're allocated today, and you can see that in the Zoom in the discussion area. So there's a couple of ways you can, you know, keep working together. If you really wanted to, you could try something different. You could go with a Google Doc, or you could set up some sort of Slack channel, or, you know, really up to you. We've put down some examples of collaborative tools, but totally up to you what you want to use. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Nivek. So we're well over time, so I'm going to draw it to a close here. If you have questions for us, please drop them into the course inbox or email us and we'll get back to you. I want to especially thank our wonderful guest speakers today. Thank you to Carson, to Kristen, and to Anna. Really appreciate you giving up time, some of you on holidays as well, to speak with us today and to share your experiences with our participants. I'm sure they really valued it. So thank you to the three of you. And thanks everyone for coming along today. It's been great to see so many of you here for this second session, and we hope to see you again next week and in the course in between. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.